Paul Cézanne is often regarded as a solitary figure, standing at the crossroads of tradition and modernity. His work, while misunderstood for much of his lifetime, would later come to be seen as the critical bridge between 19th century Impressionism and the radical innovations of 20th century modernist art. To understand Cézanne is to delve into the complexities of a mind that neither fit comfortably within the movements of his time nor sought to. His revolutionary contribution was not born from flamboyance or spectacle, but from a relentless, almost obsessive dedication to uncovering the fundamental truths behind visual experience. Unlike many of his contemporaries who embraced rapid change and societal engagement, Cézanne worked in relative isolation. His revolution was internal, a quiet yet seismic shift in the understanding of form, color, and composition. Where others sought the fleeting effects of light, Cézanne sought permanence and structure beneath the visible world. His vision was less about capturing the transient and more about revealing the eternal geometries that shape perception. At a time when the art world celebrated spontaneity and the fleeting beauty of the moment, particularly through Impressionism, Cézanne introduced a counterpoint that demanded contemplation. His paintings were less concerned with immediate visual pleasure and more with challenging the viewer's perception. His brushstrokes, deliberate and layered, constructed form rather than simply decorating it. Through this approach, Cézanne redefined the act of painting itself, not as a mirror of reality, but as a means of reconstructing it on the canvas. The revolutionary aspect of Cézanne's work also lies in his stubborn refusal to compromise his vision. While many artists sought approval from salons, critics, and the public, Cézanne's artistic trajectory was marked by an almost defiant indifference to external judgment. Repeated rejections from official exhibitions did not dissuade him. Instead, they seemed to push him further into his own investigations, away from the noise of popular acclaim and deeper into the quiet rigor of artistic inquiry. Cézanne's insistence on seeing differently challenged not only his contemporaries, but also the generations that followed. In his landscapes, portraits, and still lives, he refused to adhere to the conventions of linear perspective that had dominated Western art since the Renaissance. Instead, he proposed a new vision, one that acknowledged the instability of human sight, where multiple perspectives could exist within a single frame. This radical approach would profoundly influence artists such as Picasso and Matisse, who openly credited Cézanne as a foundational figure in the evolution of modern art. Yet, Cézanne's revolution was not immediate. His work, frequently ridiculed by critics during his lifetime, was misunderstood precisely because it defied easy categorization. Too structured for the Impressionists, too experimental for the academic institutions, Cézanne occupied a precarious space. It would only be toward the end of his life, and more so after his death, that the full magnitude of his innovation would be recognized. In understanding Cézanne's revolutionary impact, it is essential to appreciate the philosophical dimension of his approach. He sought to express a deeper reality, one that was not merely seen, but was felt through careful construction. Each plane of color, each shift in line, was an attempt to capture the internal logic of the natural world. For Cézanne, painting was not about reproducing appearances, but about exploring the processes by which we come to perceive form and space. The seriousness with which he approached his work can also be seen in his famous phrase, "To make of Impressionism something solid and lasting like the art of museums." This statement reveals his ambition to transcend the ephemeral quality of Impressionism and establish a more enduring form of artistic expression. Cézanne did not reject Impressionism entirely. Rather, he sought to build upon its discoveries, rooting its fleeting impressions within a deeper, structural order. Moreover, Cézanne's dedication highlights a broader truth about artistic innovation, that true breakthroughs often require prolonged periods of solitude, patience, and struggle. The artist's life illustrates that the most transformative contributions are not always born in the center of cultural movements, but often on their peripheries, where individuals labor quietly against the grain of convention. Nestled in the warm, sun-drenched landscapes of southern France, the small town of Aix-en-Provence was where Paul Cézanne first opened his eyes to the world. Born on January 19, 1839, he entered a place rich with tradition, where the slow rhythms of rural life merged with an undercurrent of historical pride. The town, with its winding streets, ochre-hued houses, and imposing avenues of plane trees, offered Cézanne a visual tapestry that would later become deeply embedded in his art. Cézanne's family occupied a comfortable position within the town's social structure. His father, Louis-Auguste Cézanne, was a successful banker. This financial stability ensured that Paul's childhood was free from material worries. Yet the stern authority of his father cast a long shadow over his early years. Louis-Auguste, a pragmatic and commanding figure, envisioned a secure future for his son, far removed from the uncertainties of an artist's life. Paul's mother, an Elizabeth Honorine Aubert, offered a gentler influence. Poetic and sensitive by nature, she nurtured her son's early inclinations toward imagination and introspection. From her, young Paul inherited a quiet, contemplative spirit and a love for the landscapes that sprawled beyond the town's edges, places where groves of olive trees met distant, rugged hills. Education played a central role in Cézanne's formative years. He attended the prestigious College Bourbon, where he received a classical education steeped in Latin, Greek, literature, and mathematics. It was here that he met Émile Zola, a connection that would profoundly influence both of their lives. The two boys, so different in temperament, yet united by mutual admiration, forged a bond rooted in shared dreams of breaking free from the rigid expectations of their provincial upbringing. The youthful Cézanne was not a figure of immediate brilliance. His academic performance was solid but unspectacular. He was described by teachers as earnest but rebellious, sometimes distracted, other times fiercely determined. Though his father envisioned a legal career for him, Paul's notebooks frequently bloomed with sketches in the margins, rough yet vivid glimpses into a mind already captivated by the act of seeing and reproducing. Beyond the confines of school, the surrounding countryside beckoned. The imposing silhouette of Mont Saint-Victoire, the rolling fields of wheat, and the orchards heavy with fruit left an indelible mark on Cézanne's young imagination. Weekends often found him wandering these landscapes, his eyes tracing the lines of hills and the way the light played across fields, sensations that would later resurface again and again in his mature work. Despite the picturesque environment, there was a persistent sense of constraint that haunted Cézanne's early life. The weight of expectation, combined with his own turbulent emotions, often erupted into moods of anger, stubbornness, and withdrawal. Childhood companions noted his mercurial temperament. Moments of laughter could quickly give way to brooding silences, hinting at the internal struggles that would characterize much of his adult life. It was during these early years that Cézanne also developed an appreciation for the solidity of objects, a fascination that went beyond mere surface appearances. Whether observing the heavy trunk of a tree or the rough texture of a stone wall, he seemed instinctively drawn to the tangible essence of things, a sensitivity that traditional academic education could not fully satisfy. The town of Aix, with its fountains, sun-dappled squares, and subdued elegance, formed an emotional and visual vocabulary that Cézanne would never truly abandon. Even when later drawn to the cosmopolitan energy of Paris, his heart remained tethered to the southern light, the rocky outcrops, and the golden fields of his birthplace. Aix-en-Provence was not simply a childhood home. It was the wellspring of his artistic vision. In the bright classrooms and shaded courtyards of the College Bourbon, a meeting of two restless minds took place. A meeting that would shape the course of both literature and painting. Paul Cézanne and Émile Zola, though different in temperament and dreams, found in each other a profound and lasting companionship. Their friendship, beginning in the innocent years of adolescence, would evolve into a complex relationship filled with admiration, rivalry, and ultimately, painful estrangement. Émile Zola, the son of an Italian engineer and a French mother, had known early hardship. His father's premature death left the family in reduced circumstances, sharpening Zola's awareness of social injustices and feeding his fierce ambition. Where Cézanne's path was cushioned by familial wealth, Zola's was marked by struggle and an urgent need to succeed. Yet, the two boys connected through a shared dissatisfaction with their provincial surroundings and a burning desire to create something greater than themselves. The friendship unfolded in a rhythm of lively debates, endless walks, and afternoons spent sketching ideas in notebooks. Together, they explored the streets of Aix, debating philosophy, poetry, and the pursuit of truth in art. Zola's fierce intellect and passion for realism challenged Cézanne's burgeoning artistic instincts, pushing him to think more critically about the role of the artist in society and the authenticity of artistic expression. The pair often retreated to the countryside, books and sketchpads in hand, beneath the towering cypresses or beside sun-dappled streams. They spoke of futures that seemed dazzling and limitless. Zola envisioned a life as a great writer in Paris. Cézanne dreamed more hesitantly of finding a voice through painting. In these moments, their bond deepened into a shared conviction that art must be a reflection of deeper truths, not merely a replication of appearances. When Zola left Aix-en-Provence in 1858 to pursue his literary ambitions in Paris, the rupture was palpable for Cézanne. The absence of his closest confidant left a void that nothing in Aix could fill. Letters flew between them, filled with encouragement, reflections, and promises of reunion. Zola urged Cézanne to leave the stifling confines of his hometown and join him in the capital, where the avant-garde thrived and opportunity beckoned. Zola's success in Paris was not immediate, but his persistence paid off. By the late 1860s, he had begun to gain recognition for his journalism and novels, becoming a central figure in the naturalist literary movement. His rising fame became a symbol of possibility for Cézanne, who still struggled with doubts and paternal opposition. Zola's ascent seemed to affirm that relentless authenticity and hard work could conquer the resistance of the establishment. When Cézanne finally made his tentative moves toward Parisian life, Zola's support was crucial. The writer introduced him to bohemian circles, where young artists, poets, and critics gathered in dimly lit cafes to argue about revolution and aesthetics. In these settings, Cézanne encountered the radical spirit of the age, a spirit that both invigorated and overwhelmed his naturally reserved nature. Zola's confidence acted as a shield, providing Cézanne with a sense of belonging, however temporary. Despite their closeness, differences between them gradually widened. Zola, pragmatic and socially astute, maneuvered through the literary and political currents of the time with increasing skill. Cézanne, on the other hand, recoiled from public life, retreating into a world of intense personal struggle and artistic experimentation. Where Zola sought engagement with society, Cézanne sought refuge from it, preferring the slow, private construction of his own truth. The fracture in their friendship came slowly, almost imperceptibly, but its final break was unmistakable. In 1886, Zola published his novel L'Oeuvre, a story centered on a tragic, misunderstood painter whose failures ultimately lead to despair and suicide. Many in their circle, and Cézanne himself, recognized painful echoes of his own life in the fictional character. Whether or not Zola intended the portrait as a critique, Cézanne felt betrayed, his vulnerabilities exposed to public judgment. He withdrew completely, severing the last ties to his childhood friend. The great city of Paris had long exerted a magnetic pull on ambitious young men from the provinces, and for Paul Cézanne, it represented both a glittering promise and an ominous challenge. With a mixture of hope and apprehension, he finally left Aix-en-Provence to confront the capital, the very heart of the French art world. In his mind, Paris was not merely a place. It was the proving ground where he would either find his destiny or be cast aside. Arriving in the early 1860s, Cézanne was immediately struck by the overwhelming vastness and chaos of the city. Wide boulevards bustled with carriages and pedestrians. Gaslights flickered against the evening sky, and cafes teemed with artists, writers, and dreamers. For a young man accustomed to the slow rhythms of Aix, the frenetic pace of Paris was both intoxicating and alienating. There was beauty here, but also a cold indifference that unsettled him. Determined to refine his skills, Cézanne enrolled at the Académie Suisse, a liberal, unofficial art school known for its accessibility to young artists excluded from the official École des Beaux-Arts. Within its modest, dusty studios, he encountered fellow strivers. Among them, Camille Pissarro, who shared his passion for experimentation and defiance of convention. Here, Cézanne was exposed to new ideas that challenged his earlier, more instinctive approach to painting. Yet, the path ahead was steep and filled with setbacks. Submitting his works to the prestigious Salon de Paris, the leading annual art exhibition of the time, Cézanne faced repeated rejections. The jury, loyal to academic standards favoring polished technique and idealized subjects, viewed his rough, heavily textured canvases as crude and unacceptable. Each rejection was a public humiliation, stinging reminders that his vision found little favor among the gatekeepers of taste. Living conditions during these early Parisian years were harsh. Cézanne rented small, dark studios and often endured financial insecurity, despite the occasional help from his father. Paris offered little comfort for an artist who had not yet found his footing. There were days when discouragement threatened to drown his ambition, and he would retreat into anger, isolation, or brooding walks through the city's gray streets. Despite these hardships, Cézanne continued to absorb the influences swirling around him. He haunted the Louvre, studying the masterpieces of Rubens, Delacroix, and Courbet with a reverence that bordered on obsession. He was particularly drawn to the raw physicality and emotional force of Courbet's realism, which validated his instinct to depict life not as it should be, but as it truly was: flawed, rough, and deeply textured. The café culture of Paris also provided him with critical exposure to new ideas. In smoky rooms where artists and intellectuals argued over aesthetics and politics, Cézanne listened more often than he spoke, soaking in the rebellious energy that coursed through these gatherings. Impressionist pioneers like Monet and Renoir moved within these circles, though Cézanne, with his awkward manners and intense demeanor, often remained on the margins. Throughout these years, a tension grew within him. The need to reconcile the lush, emotional forces stirring in his heart with the rigorous, structured demands of serious art. His paintings from this period reflected this inner conflict. Thick with dark tones, heavy with impasto, and charged with a sense of violent emotion barely held in check. They were raw declarations of identity, assertions of his refusal to mimic the smooth surfaces preferred by the academicians. Paris taught Cézanne invaluable lessons, though they came at great emotional cost. He learned that true innovation would not be welcomed with open arms, that audiences clung to tradition with fierce tenacity, and that the path to creating something genuinely new would be one of profound solitude. His Parisian experience chipped away at any remaining illusions he might have held about the ease of artistic success. In the midst of this struggle, a critical realization took root within Cézanne. If he were to find his true voice, he could not rely on external validation. Paris could offer exposure and education, but the clarity of vision he sought would have to come from within. This understanding would guide the next phase of his journey, a journey that would lead him away from the capital's dazzling distractions and deeper into the private pursuit of an art that was entirely his own. In the vibrant, rebellious atmosphere of Paris in the 1870s, Impressionism was taking shape as a new force, shaking the foundations of academic art. Artists like Claude Monet, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and Edgar Degas sought to capture fleeting moments, the dance of light on water, and the ephemeral beauty of modern life. Their canvases shimmered with color and movement, rejecting the rigid formalities of the salon. Paul Cézanne found himself drawn into their orbit, yet he remained, characteristically, a figure apart, intrigued by their methods, but never fully comfortable within their ranks. It was through his growing association with Camille Pissarro that Cézanne became more closely linked to the Impressionist circle. Pissarro, older and more patient, saw potential in the younger artist's fierce originality. Under his quiet mentorship, Cézanne began to experiment with lighter palettes, quicker brushstrokes, and painting in plein air, techniques that were hallmarks of Impressionist practice. For a time, the camaraderie and mutual exploration invigorated him, opening new possibilities for how to approach the canvas. The countryside around Pontoise and later Auvers-sur-Oise, where Pissarro often painted, became the setting for some of Cézanne's most significant experiments during this phase. Standing beside Pissarro in fields flooded with sunlight, Cézanne worked to loosen his heavy touch, seeking to capture the shimmering atmosphere rather than the dense, brooding masses he had previously favored. His landscapes from this period pulse with a new vitality, though they still bear the stamp of his more deliberate, weighty sensibility. Despite his efforts to align with Impressionism's outward techniques, Cézanne's instinct remained different. Where Monet sought to convey the instantaneity of perception, Cézanne aimed for something more enduring, a permanence beneath the fleeting impressions. He spoke of wanting to make of Impressionism something solid and lasting like the art of the museums. This philosophical divergence placed him at odds with the movement's essential spirit, even as he admired its innovations. In 1874, Cézanne exhibited at the first Impressionist exhibition, held at the studio of the photographer Nader. The show was a bold declaration of independence from the salon, but for Cézanne, the experience was bitter. His paintings, raw, intense, and structurally heavy, stood in stark contrast to the luminous delicacy of Monet's and Renoir's works. Critics singled him out for particular scorn, describing his paintings as grotesque and incomprehensible. The sting of public mockery deepened Cézanne's isolation and eroded his fragile confidence. Still, the Impressionist circle remained, for a time, a loose and welcoming community. Cézanne participated in the third Impressionist exhibition in 1877, yet each interaction seemed to underscore his sense of difference. In conversations at cafes and studios, where the artist debated theory and technique, Cézanne often grew tense and defensive. He distrusted easy consensus and resisted being absorbed into any collective identity, however revolutionary. The very nature of Impressionist ideals, spontaneity, the capture of the immediate, ran counter to Cézanne's emerging vision of slow, methodical construction. He began to retreat from their gatherings, turning inward to refine a personal style that prioritized form and underlying structure over fleeting sensation. His brushstrokes became less about recording light and more about building mass. Color was no longer merely atmospheric, but became a tool for modeling volume and depth. Observers who knew him during this time noted Cézanne's increasing withdrawal. His social awkwardness deepened, making group exhibitions and public appearances agonizing ordeals. He preferred the solitude of his studio or the quiet hills of the countryside, where he could pursue his artistic goals free from the pressure of movements or trends. Though he continued to admire the courage of the Impressionists, he recognized that his path would lead elsewhere. Cézanne's relationship with Impressionism was thus a complicated one, a period of apprenticeship, inspiration, and temporary alignment, but ultimately a divergence towards solitary vision. He absorbed many lessons from his Impressionist friends, lessons about light, color, and composition, but he transformed them into something sturdier and more analytical. In the process, he set the stage for a new kind of painting that would outgrow the concerns of both academic tradition and Impressionist immediacy. By the close of the 1870s, Cézanne had distanced himself from the Impressionist group, both physically and philosophically. He withdrew to the familiar landscapes of southern France, where he would spend years refining a revolutionary approach to painting. An approach that sought not the fleeting, but the eternal, not the momentary sparkle, but the profound and enduring architecture of the visible world. The decision to leave the clamor of Paris behind was not made lightly, but for Paul Cézanne, it became increasingly necessary. The relentless criticism, the sense of alienation even among the avant-garde, and the deepening need for silence and reflection pushed him back toward the south. Returning to Provence, to the rugged hills and serene villages of his youth, Cézanne sought not refuge, but renewal, a place where he could strip away all distractions and confront his art with absolute honesty. The landscapes that welcomed him were familiar yet transformed. The craggy outline of the Montagne Saint-Victoire, the rolling fields of olive trees, the sun-baked stone houses, these scenes were etched into his memory, but now they took on new meaning. No longer backdrops to childhood games, they became the essential elements of a universe he longed to reconstruct on canvas, an orderly, enduring vision born from the chaos of nature. Cézanne settled into a disciplined, almost monastic routine. Each day, he would rise early and, with a knapsack of paints and canvases, trek into the countryside. He favored the same paths and vantage points, returning to certain sites again and again to observe the shifting light and slow changes of the seasons. His method was patient and methodical, a marked contrast to the rapid execution favored by many of his Parisian contemporaries. In a modest studio, surrounded by the bare essentials, Cézanne worked with a relentless focus. His canvases began to display a new structural rigor, where each brushstroke acted not merely as a mark, but as a building block. Trees, rocks, and mountains were rendered not as fleeting impressions, but as solid, geometric forms, each carefully placed within a harmonious, self-sufficient order. The world, as Cézanne saw it, was a tapestry of volumes and planes, of color and line brought into a fragile equilibrium. Isolation deepened his connection to his surroundings, but also exacerbated his natural tendency toward introspection and suspicion. Cézanne grew increasingly wary of visitors, even old friends. He feared misunderstanding and misinterpretation, preferring the silent companionship of the landscape to the volatile judgments of people. This self-imposed solitude became both his shield and his crucible, allowing his vision to mature free from the currents of fashionable taste. Family tensions simmered in the background. Though Cézanne's father continued to provide some financial support, there was little understanding between them. His relationship with Hortense Fouquet, his partner and later wife, was also fraught with complexity. Cézanne, deeply private and often brusque, struggled to reconcile his need for solitude with the demands of domestic life. Their son, Paul, born in 1872, added another dimension of responsibility, though Cézanne often kept his personal life at a distance from his work. The natural environment of Provence offered endless challenges and inspirations. Cézanne was fascinated by the way sunlight sculpted the hills, by the dense weave of green and ochre that characterized the earth, by the sharp contrast between the brilliant blue of the sky and the muted tones of the fields. His paintings from this period bear witness to an intense dialogue between artist and landscape, a dialogue marked by reverence, struggle, and a desire to uncover hidden structures beneath visible surfaces. As he painted, Cézanne sought not merely to represent nature, but to parallel its processes. He once declared that he wanted to treat nature by the cylinder, the sphere, and the cone. In these words lay the seed of a profound transformation, the abstraction of the world into elemental forms, a process that would eventually influence entire generations of modern artists. Yet at the time, Cézanne's efforts remained largely unknown and misunderstood, hidden in the folds of his provincial retreat. There was a rugged grandeur to the work he produced in Provence, a raw, almost primal energy fused with an emerging sophistication. His still lives, arrangements of apples, pictures, and cloth seemed deceptively simple, yet their compositional balance and subtle distortions revealed an intense deliberation. His portraits, often of local peasants or his own family, captured not external likeness but a deeper psychological presence. The years of solitude hardened Cézanne's resolve and sharpened his singular vision. No longer seeking acceptance from critics or peers, he dedicated himself fully to the pursuit of a painting that would be, as he imagined, something solid and durable, like the art of the museums. In the quiet hills of Provence, under the vast, unchanging sky, Cézanne laid the foundations for a revolution he could scarcely have imagined, a revolution that would eventually reshape the very language of modern art. As the years passed, Paul Cézanne's art matured into a language wholly his own, a language that balanced reverence for classical traditions with a daring spirit of innovation. Isolated from the pressures of the Parisian art world and entrenched in the rugged serenity of Provence, he forged a style that defied easy categorization. His canvases, once burdened with the weight of youthful turmoil, now radiated a quiet authority, born of sustained observation and uncompromising discipline. In his mature works, Cézanne treated each subject, whether a mountain, a bowl of fruit, or a human figure, with an almost sacred seriousness. He did not seek mere resemblance. Instead, he endeavored to reconstruct the visible world according to an inner logic, giving weight and permanence to things seen. His brushstrokes, once erratic and heavy, became measured, deliberate, almost architectural in their precision. Each patch of color was carefully placed to build form, volume, and structure, brick by brick across the canvas. Still life became one of his favorite genres during this period, and through it, he pushed the boundaries of spatial representation. In his compositions, Objects seemed to teeter precariously, tables tilted forward, and perspectives collapsed in ways that defied the conventional rules of optics. Yet these distortions were not accidents. They reflected Cézanne's profound understanding of perception as a living, shifting process, not a fixed mechanical recording. He challenged viewers to see differently, to experience the tensions and harmonies inherent in the act of seeing itself. Similarly, his landscapes transcended the pastoral charm often associated with such scenes. When he painted the Montagne Sainte-Victoire, it was not merely to depict a mountain, but to express its enduring, monumental presence. He captured not just the physical contours, but the profound sense of time and being embedded in the earth's slow, silent unfolding. His treatment of light and color in these landscapes was subtle yet radical, not aimed at creating optical illusions, but at revealing the underlying geometry and rhythm of nature. In his portraits, Cézanne adopted an unflinching approach. He did not flatter his subjects, nor seek to capture fleeting expressions. Instead, he presented them as solemn, enduring presences, often imbued with a kind of existential gravity. His series of portraits of Madame Cézanne reveal a relationship less sentimental than formal, with the sitter becoming almost an element of the composition itself, stable, enigmatic, and timeless. Cézanne's palette evolved as well. The dark, brooding tones of his early years gave way to luminous, resonant colors. He discovered that by placing colors side by side, rather than blending them, he could create a vibrating sense of depth and life. Greens, blues, ochres, and reds interacted dynamically, constructing forms not through lines but through the tension of juxtaposed hues. This chromatic approach heralded a seismic shift in the understanding of color in painting. Throughout this period, Cézanne wrestled with the challenge of representing three-dimensionality on a flat surface. He began to loosen the traditional perspective, allowing multiple viewpoints to coexist within a single image. This innovation, subtle but profound, laid the groundwork for the Cubist experiments of Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque decades later. Cézanne, however, pursued these ideas not through theoretical manifestos, but through patient, solitary labor on each canvas. Even in his most ambitious works, there remained a sense of modesty, of rigorous self-restraint. Cézanne did not indulge in grand historical narratives or melodramatic scenes. His ambition was quieter yet more radical, to represent reality in a way that honored both its sensory richness and its underlying order. In this pursuit, he aligned himself with classical ideals, yet he achieved them through means utterly new to his time. Despite his growing mastery, Cézanne continued to experience deep dissatisfaction with his work. He was known to labor over a single painting for months, even years, revisiting and reworking it with tireless determination. He often spoke of the instability of sensation and the difficulty of capturing it with the necessary solidity. This internal tension between the shifting nature of experience and the desire for enduring form gave his mature work its unique, almost metaphysical intensity. By the turn of the century, Cézanne's mature style stood fully formed, a beacon of both continuity and revolution. Though recognition from the broader public remained limited, a younger generation of artists and critics had begun to recognize the profound implications of his achievement. Cézanne had not merely painted the visible world. He had reimagined the very relationship between artist, viewer, and reality. In his quiet studio and among the hills of Provence, he had built a bridge between the ancient certainties of the classical world and the thrilling uncertainties of modernity. In the twilight of his life, Paul Cézanne began to witness a slow but unmistakable change in how his work was perceived. After decades of laboring in relative obscurity, ridiculed or dismissed by the mainstream art world, he found himself, almost reluctantly, stepping into the light of recognition. The world that had once scoffed at his radical visions was now starting to listen, its appetite sharpened by the winds of change stirring the cultural landscape of France and beyond. The first signs of this shift came quietly. Younger artists and critics, sensing the limitations of Impressionism and the academic tradition, began looking to Cézanne for answers. Figures like Ambroise Vollard, an ambitious young art dealer, saw in Cézanne's canvases a depth and complexity that promised to shape the future of painting. Vollard's keen eye and determination played a crucial role in bringing Cézanne's work to a broader audience, culminating in the pivotal solo exhibition he organized in 1895 at his Paris gallery. This exhibition marked a turning point. Though the broader public remained cautious, the show drew significant attention among the avant-garde. Writers, collectors, and, most importantly, fellow artists came to see the paintings that defied conventional categories. They encountered still lives that seemed to breathe with an inner structure, landscapes that offered not fleeting impressions, but enduring visions, and portraits that confronted the viewer with silent, unyielding presence. For Cézanne, recognition was a double-edged sword. He welcomed the validation, but recoiled from the social obligations that success entailed. Invitations to salons, galleries, and artistic gatherings often went unanswered. He dreaded conversations with journalists, who seemed eager to trap him in tidy narratives. The attention, however well-meaning, felt intrusive to a man who had spent his life shielding his creative solitude. Despite his reluctance, new opportunities emerged. Commissions and purchases from discerning collectors provided Cézanne with a degree of financial independence he had never fully enjoyed before. With this stability, he could work more freely, without the anxieties that had shadowed his earlier years. Yet he remained critical of his own output, often destroying canvases that failed to meet his punishing standards, a testament to the perfectionism that had shaped his entire career. As his fame grew, so did the number of pilgrims who sought him out in Aix-en-Provence. Artists such as Émile Bernard and Maurice Denis made the journey south to meet the master they revered from afar. Their visits were often brief and awkward. Cézanne's reserved nature made him a difficult companion. Still, even in his reticence, he offered insights that would ripple through the next generation, encouraging them to look beyond surface appearances and seek the structural core of their subjects. Critical opinion also began to shift. Influential writers like Octave Mirbeau and Gustave Geffroy praised Cézanne's dedication to truth in art, framing him not as an eccentric, but as a visionary whose contributions pointed toward a new era. His work was no longer viewed merely as peculiar, but as the cornerstone of something profound and necessary, a reimagining of the foundations of painting. Perhaps most gratifying to Cézanne was the growing acknowledgement from institutions that had once ignored or scorned him. His paintings began to find their way into prestigious collections and museums. In 1904, he was invited to exhibit at the Salon d'Automne in Paris, a powerful affirmation of his evolving status. Although he remained wary of public exhibitions, the acceptance of his work by major institutions signaled a victory over years of marginalization. Despite these late honors, Cézanne remained focused on his artistic quest. Success had come too late to alter the essential course of his life. His routines stayed unchanged. Long walks through the countryside, hours spent before the easel, endless revisions of compositions that he deemed perpetually unfinished. Fame, he knew, was a fleeting thing, but the work was eternal. By the dawn of the 20th century, Cézanne stood as a solitary giant, a bridge between the past and the future. Younger artists revered him not merely for his accomplishments, but for his integrity, the stubborn, patient pursuit of a vision undiluted by fashion or compromise. As Paul Cézanne entered the final years of his life, the interplay between his physical frailty and his unwavering artistic drive became more pronounced. His body, once capable of long solitary walks across the rugged terrain of Provence, began to betray him. Chronic health issues, particularly diabetes, sapped his strength, making each day's labor at the easel more arduous. Yet the flame of creativity within him burned brighter than ever, compelling him to work with an almost feverish intensity. Cézanne often spoke of the urgency he felt, a race against time to complete the grand vision he had spent a lifetime pursuing. Each morning, he prepared his tools meticulously, as though entering a sacred ritual. Brushes were cleaned with care, colors were laid out with precision, and canvases were chosen with a mind sharpened by decades of experience. Every gesture bore the gravity of necessity, a silent acknowledgement that there might not be another day to correct a stroke or refine a composition. His artistic focus during these final years shifted even further toward distillation and essence. The Montaigne Saint Victoire, a motif he had returned to time and again, became almost an obsession. Each painting sought not merely to represent the mountain, but to encapsulate its spirit, its eternal dialogue with the sky and land around it. His brushwork became increasingly fragmented yet cohesive, an intricate tapestry of strokes that dissolved into pure sensation when seen up close and reassembled into solid form when viewed from afar. Portraiture, too, remained central to his practice. In the series of Card Players, Cézanne captured a humanity stripped of ornament and artifice. The figures, peasants immersed in their quiet concentration, became monuments to stoicism and endurance. Their rough hands, weathered faces, and heavy clothing were rendered with a tenderness that belied Cézanne's own struggles, an empathy born of recognizing the dignity and persistence against the odds. At times, Cézanne ventured beyond Aix to seek new subjects, but even short trips proved taxing. The physical exertion, combined with his reclusive temperament, made extended travel nearly impossible. Instead, he found infinite variety within the familiar. In his studio and the surrounding gardens, he painted bathers, apples, pictures, and the ever-shifting skies, treating each as a universe unto itself, worthy of endless exploration. The Monumental Bathers series occupied much of his imagination during these final years. Unlike his earlier nudes, these compositions were not about sensuality or mythology, but about form and rhythm. Groups of bodies intertwined with nature, creating a living architecture that seemed at once timeless and deeply personal. The figures were no longer individualized. They had become part of the landscape, as elemental and enduring as rocks or trees. Despite his weakening condition, Cézanne's work ethic remained relentless. Often, he painted outdoors under harsh conditions, unwilling to let the weather dictate his schedule. It was during one such session, under a sudden Provençal storm, that he collapsed. Carried home by a passerby, he returned to his studio the very next day, feverish and fragile, determined to continue painting. This stubborn defiance in the face of mortality defined his last chapter. Art was not simply a vocation for Cézanne. It was existence itself. The atmosphere around him was increasingly one of reverence. Former skeptics approached him now with admiration. Young artists whispered his name with a kind of awe, and critics began to cite him as the progenitor of a new, deeper vision of painting. Yet, true to his nature, Cézanne received these accolades with skepticism, mistrustful of flattery, and wary of anything that might distract from the purity of his pursuit. Isolation remained his companion to the end, but it was a chosen solitude, a fortress built not of resentment but of dedication. In the quiet of his studio, surrounded by the scent of turpentine and the muted Provençal light filtering through the windows, he found a space to engage fully with his subjects, to wrestle each day with the formidable challenge of transmuting fleeting perceptions into lasting form. On October 22, 1906, Paul Cézanne succumbed to pneumonia, a consequence of his collapse in the storm. His death marked the conclusion of a life lived almost entirely in service to art. Yet even as his earthly journey ended, the works he left behind began to breathe with a life of their own, silent yet eloquent, humble yet revolutionary. In his final years of struggle and triumph, Cézanne secured a place not just in the history of painting, but in the very architecture of modern thought about art and vision. When Paul Cézanne passed away in 1906, his influence was still largely confined to the inner circles of the avant-garde, but his death heralded a profound shift in the course of modern art. Over the years that followed, his ideas began to take root, and his once revolutionary approach to space, form, and color transformed the landscape of painting. What had been dismissed as eccentricity in his lifetime became, in death, the foundation for the next great leap forward in art history. Cézanne's influence on the world of art was not immediate or overt. His work was complex, built on years of quiet struggle and experimentation, and it was often misunderstood or dismissed as incomplete. But as the 20th century unfolded, a new generation of artists began to unravel the rich, intricate threads woven into Cézanne's canvases. His careful examination of form, his obsession with capturing the essence of objects, and his revolutionary approach to perspective became the scaffolding upon which the new movements of modern art would be built. The first to embrace Cézanne's radical rethinking of space were the Cubists, led by Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. They found in Cézanne's paintings an implicit challenge to traditional perspectives and linearity. His use of fragmented planes and multiple viewpoints laid the groundwork for Cubism, where the fragmentation of reality would become an aesthetic in itself. His approach to still life, wherein objects were viewed from various angles simultaneously, offered Picasso and Braque the visual vocabulary to break free from the constraints of traditional representation. In Picasso's early work, the influence of Cézanne is evident. His cubist renditions of the human form and still life can be traced directly back to Cézanne's geometric simplifications of objects, which he had studied with such intensity. The legacy of Cézanne's geometric approach to nature was thus felt most strongly in Cubism, but his impact extended far beyond that, influencing many other artistic movements in the years that followed. Fauvism, with its bold, expressive use of color, was another movement that found a deep resonance in Cézanne's work. While Henri Matisse and his contemporaries pushed color to emotional extremes, they shared Cézanne's belief in the power of color to shape form. The artist's color choices were not simply to depict light or atmosphere, but to convey structure. This use of color, both as a tool of structure and as a means of expressing a deeper, physical understanding of space, became a key element in Fauvist work. Expressionists also found in Cézanne a kindred spirit. His emphasis on conveying an emotional truth through the depiction of the world around him aligned closely with the goals of artists like Edvard Munch and Egon Schiele. Cézanne's work was always about more than what the eye could see. It was about the inner reality, the structures beneath the surface. This exploration of inner truth resonated with Expressionist concerns and their desire to transcend mere representation in favor of personal, emotional expression. Cézanne's method of abstraction also had a profound impact on the development of abstract art. His continual breakdown of form into fundamental shapes, spheres, cones, and cylinders, influenced artists like Vasily Kandinsky, who would go on to experiment with color and form in non-representational ways. For Kandinsky, Cézanne's ability to reduce nature to basic geometric shapes provided a gateway to pure abstraction, where color and form could exist free from the need for representational context. As the Surrealists began to form their own philosophical and artistic agenda, they also looked to Cézanne. His exploration of perception, his attempts to capture the intangible, mirrored the Surrealist interest in the subconscious and the dreamlike aspects of human experience. In a way, Cézanne's focus on the impossible relationships between the elements of nature, the way a mountain, for example, could simultaneously exist in multiple planes, was a precursor to Surrealist efforts to represent the paradoxical and often illogical connections of the mind. Even those artists who did not directly follow Cézanne's formal innovations were inspired by his relentless pursuit of a deeper truth. His discipline, his commitment to finding the essential structure in nature, and his refusal to bend to popular trends became a model for all future generations of artists. He had opened up new ways of seeing the world, and the task for subsequent artists was not to replicate his work, but to expand upon it, as he himself had done with the legacy of Impressionism. Institutions began to recognize Cézanne's importance in the years following his death. The Musée Cézanne in Aix-en-Provence, established in the 1950s, stands as a testament to his enduring influence. His work began to be celebrated not just in the rarefied circles of the avant-garde, but in major museums across the world. Exhibitions dedicated to his paintings drew large crowds, and his once overlooked canvases found a home in the collections of the world's most prestigious institutions. By the mid-20th century, Cézanne had become synonymous with modernity itself. The disjointed, fragmented world that emerged in the wake of two world wars and a rapidly changing global landscape was understood through the lens of Cézanne's art. He had shown that painting could no longer be about mimicking reality. It could be a tool for discovering deeper truths, for constructing new ways of perceiving and understanding the world. This radical shift opened the floodgates for the avant-garde movements that would dominate the rest of the 20th century. In the end, Cézanne's greatest legacy lies not just in his works, but in the way he forced artists to reconsider their relationship with the world around them. He did not merely depict nature. He translated it into a new visual language, one that was fragmented, yet whole, abstract, yet tangible. For all his struggles with isolation, recognition, and perfectionism, he had become the father of modern art, the quiet revolutionary whose influence reshaped the future.